We now shift our focus to the South China Sea, where reports said the U.S. aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt and its strike group sailed last week. It is the third time the strike group has reportedly entered those waters this year, and reports said Washington was making those naval excursions with blessings from the so-called Indo-Pacific allies, Japan, South Korea, India, and Australia. What do rising tensions in a potentially naval security flashpoint signal? A hardening Cold War mentality? What can China do to keep regional naval security without giving up rights to sovereignty? I talked to Senior Colonel Zhou Bo, a senior fellow at the Center for International Security and Strategy from Tsinghua University, about all of this. I'm honored to be joined in the studio by Senior Colonel Zhou Bo, who is a senior fellow at the Center for International Security and Strategy at Tsinghua University. Senior Colonel Zhou, what a pleasure to see you once again.
Nice to see you.
China has been very much putting emphasis on security in the South China Sea. For example, the Taiwan issue, the security across the Taiwan Strait. Senior Colonel Zhou, any new takeaway that we could have recently?
It remains to see how Biden administration might take a different approach towards, for example, American Navy's freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea. So until now, we haven't seen new changes. On the Taiwan issue, I believe this is really the focus of China, which is underlined as a red line in Anchorage talk. So Chinese representatives have stressed on this in unprecedented serious tone, because I think this administration is a new administration, and we know at the end of Trump administration how former American Secretary of State Pompeo tried to smash all the windows to let in all kind of wind to blow in the house. So he doesn't care, and he deliberately want to leave a mess and to make the situation unmanageable for Biden administration when it comes to such issues, not only South China Sea, but Taiwan. So I think it's a good reminder for Director Yang Jiechi and for Mr. Wang Yi to stress about the importance of this issue. And I know since President Biden was a vice president before, and he has rich experience in diplomacy, so he is fully aware of the importance of the Taiwan issue towards China. So I hope he will just be sensitive to China's concern.
We do not want to use the analogy of the Cold War because China does not want to believe, or does not believe at all, that it is a relationship like former Soviet Union and the United States. But even that has a lot of very important strategic arrangement to guard it will not slide into confrontation. So, Senior Colonel Zhou, where are we now?
Previously, we only talk about accidents or incidents, mostly at sea.
Right.
But the fact that we mention it, for both sides as a crisis, indicates that we could really have crisis.
Right.
Yeah. So that is the deterioration of situation. So how to solve a problem? First of all, you have to pay attention. You have to pay attention to the fact. And the fact is, we might have crisis. So looking squarely into the issue is the first step of progress.
But Senior Colonel Zhou, talking about first step of progress, what is going to be the next step? Because we have seen a new administration coming in. Now, there is diplomatic level of discussion, which is reflected in Anchorage talk, but there's no mentioning of any security talk. And we do not want to forget, during the first two meetings in Asia, it is done by the Secretary of State and the Defense Secretary. But the Defense Secretary skipped the China meeting, going to India. So it seems that there are very different approaches right now from the U.S. side. What is the message that you're taking right here?
Well, I think it's logical for people at a diplomatic level to talk first, to lay down a whole picture. And because military relationship is only part of the overall relationship, but still we have some working level meetings going on. It's not that much publicized, but it's not a secret because we used to have talks at different levels, at deputy ministerial level, at the director's level, and there are some professional talks, for example, like MMCA, which, however, did not happen last year because of disagreement over the agenda. So that invites an older problem. You see, what you consider to be freedom of navigation, actually, for me, is a challenge to my sovereignty.
And that's not likely to be solved very soon.
Yeah, that's difficult.
The North Korea firing 2 short-range missiles, the first time test since Biden comes into office. What does it say to you?
Well, I think if we look at the situation in Korean Peninsula, it seems to have been quiet for a while. Trump administration certainly was busy with DPRK issue, but not with President Biden, because if you look at President Biden's agenda, you could imagine to what extent even foreign affairs could play in that, because he's preoccupied with pandemic and so on and so forth, and so many domestic issues, and externally is trying to strengthen democracy and alliance with allies. So DPRK really would not fall much on his radar, but probably this is the way DPRK say, hey, I'm here, yeah, I'm doing something. Yeah, you got to look at me. So this might be a reminder, although technically speaking, there is probably a need for DPRK to test its weapon system, because for how do you make sure about the capabilities of your weapons? You have to conduct test firing.
This, of course, to China is a different thing, right? We understand that during the Anchorage talks between China and the United States, in the China readout, the issue of denuclearization was actually touched. In the U.S. side, similar words were expressed as well. So what would this mean in terms of China-U.S. relations, and what it would mean for China's relationship with DPRK, who has been a friendly country from the very beginning?
Yeah, well, I think if you talk about the talks in Anchorage, I think it's almost a tit for tat, but I'm still happy to read that there are still a few identified areas for cooperation, including the issue on DPRK, because China and the U.S. would always want to cooperate on this issue of DPRK, although we might have different approaches. So because of this ever-souring relationship, which is almost close to a free fall in bilateral relationship, I think this limited area of cooperation can still work to stop the free fall in bilateral relationship. So that is how I read the importance of the meeting. In terms of China's relationship with the DPRK, I think it is good because DPRK is one of our friendly neighbors. But in terms of our position toward denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula, it's clear-cut. We do not want to see another nuclear weapon state in Korean Peninsula.
However, de facto truth is it is happening.
Yeah.
At this moment, we do not hear much yet from President Biden on his foreign policy. Mainly we saw is his foreign policy team, mainly the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor running around the world together with the Defense Secretary on the issue of security. But to you, what do you think are some of the messages that you are looking for in terms of a security situation that you are pretty much looking into?
In terms of foreign policy, I think his priority is strengthening the Western democracy and to strengthening the alliance. That's it. And China is a big issue, but it's not in the near future. We actually wonder why he hasn't talked much about China, and this is understandable because he is preoccupied with pandemic, which caused more than 1,000 people's deaths on a daily basis in the United States. So how busy he must be, right? That is his priority. But either strengthening the so-called Western democracy or alliance doesn't seem to be a good thing for China. Of course, China can handle it because if we look at these two issues, they are intrinsically problematic, I would say. Strengthening alliance, how allies would like to follow him if they believe the United States is on a stable decline. And talking about the democracy itself, apparently what happened in Capitol Hill shows that even democracy itself might become vigilant when the country itself is in decline. So democracy, Western kind of democracy itself, has experienced decline, and even it has seen riot. And what does that tell the rest of the world, right?
Both sides have been using different sets of words. China much more focusing on cooperation. Only slightly words of competition being mentioned from time to time. However, from the U.S. side, there is a pool of words. Well, you might say words not necessarily means actions, but at this point, we could only look at words, right? It's mainly cooperation, it is mentioned, but a lot of competition being mentioned, and at sometimes even rivalry being mentioned. So, Senior Colonel Zhou, how do you see the differences of words being used by both sides? Do they really illustrate how both sides look at the other, or it is more rhetoric at this point still?
Well, 3 years ago, I've written an opinion in South China Morning Post describing this relationship as a competition, but I still hope the cooperation might prevail over competition, and in worst case, competition doesn't slide into confrontation. Well, the Chinese side certainly love to talk about cooperation rather than competition, while Americans say competition could be healthy. I never consider competition healthy. I think it is only how less ugly it could be at best. So, but at a Davos meeting, President Xi did mention about competition, and he actually suggested to have a competition in the track field rather than in boxing ring. So in this way, I believe he has admitted there is an element of competition in our bilateral relationship. And now, I think the Chinese side is more open to this idea of competition between us. But still, I think there is a consensus between the two governments, or between even the two militaries, not to let the competition sliding into confrontation. But for that, the only question is how to do it.
Let's talk about what are some of the areas China and the United States, if talk strategically about security issue, need to touch on.
Well, I think there are two ways, two approaches. Number one.
So bring us your list.
Yeah, well, first of all, we must manage the current situation, not to have a confrontation. Secondly, we should look into new areas of cooperation. And what are the new areas? The point is, if you look at the balance of power between the two militaries, we would conclude that in the West Pacific, the Chinese military is getting closer to the strength of the United States. So there are so many things for us to talk about what that means, right? Because there is no buffer zone, unlike during the Cold War. The United States and the former Soviet Union have a clearly cut buffer zones. So they could even let the other countries fight the proxy wars rather than they fight directly with each other. So that is another issue. But then how about AI? How about cyber? How about outer space? These are new areas. In AI, I don't believe the difference between China and the US is very big. In outer space, basically there are two types of issues. Shall we have a peaceful exploration of the outer space? Because outer space doesn't belong to anybody.
Right.
And then we could also have, unfortunately, militarization of the outer space. And this is exactly what the US is doing. Because in 2019, at Trump administration's order, the American Space Force was established, even according to some initial disagreement of a Pentagon. So I would say that this kind of arms race, however unfortunate, has already started. But all other countries would not stand by. So that is why I have suggested a new concept, that is a recognition of mutually assured vulnerability.
Interesting. Explain, please.
Yeah. During the Cold War, what has worked out to prevent Cold War from becoming hot war. It's a mutually assured destruction because you have so many nuclear warheads and I have so many warheads. So we live in a balance of terror. But now the United States even have more satellites than any country in outer space. And China is going to have more and more satellites in the space. And all four countries, China, United States, Russia, and India, could shoot down the satellites because they have demonstrated such capability. So everybody is vulnerable in outer space. So why don't we have this kind of agreement on mutually assured vulnerability so as to stop deploying any weapons in outer space?
Now, with the rise of Chinese PLA to be modernized and the ever-increasing geopolitical tensions apparently between China and the United States, what could that mean?
This means two things for China. If you look at the Chinese military, or if you can look at all the military around the world, basically all the military around the world just would do one thing. That is self-defense or defense of territory and sovereignty. That is, of course, incumbent upon any militaries. But for major powers, it's different. For major powers, they have two more things. One is overseas interests, right? And the other thing is your international responsibilities. These two things would differentiate major powers from other middle or small powers. And when it comes to China, China's overseas interest is everywhere. Yeah, it's ubiquitous. So you have to have a stronger military to protect China's overseas interest. And well, when we talk about outer space, very few people probably think about we have an interest in outer space. Yes, it's also in outer space. And then with great power comes greater responsibility. And that is why PLA task force in the Gulf of Aden has been escorting both Chinese ships and foreign ships. So this is a perfect combination of how PLA might look like in the days to come.
Senior Colonel Zhou, if I could ask you, what is your biggest concern in terms of security in the near future?
Well, I think it is still Taiwan Strait. Yeah, because I'm not so sure about how consistent American policy toward the Taiwan issue would be. But it's good you asked this question because I forgot to mention I'm most happy with U.S. representative to reiterate American government's one China policy during Anchorage meeting. This is very important for us. I hope they do honor the words.
Senior Colonel Zhou Bo, always a pleasure. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
That's my talk with Zhou Bo, a Chinese military expert. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching and